Hi, Henry.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, tired.
Long day.
It's a long day. Yes. How are you guys?
Good.
Henry,
Great.
can you give me access to share the screen because I'm gonna be working out my today.
Yep. Give me 1 second. Yep.
Henry, you must be up in Gainesville. Look at the clock tower, the Carolyn Tower behind you, the trees.
I'm tropical.
Well, I'm
So
here
how are you?
in my office, so
Are you still in your office? No, kidding.
I cleaned it up to look good for the video.
Oh, that's crazy, Mike.
I'm actually kidding. I cleaned it up before I went to Tallahassee last weekend. I hate leaving an office in a shambles.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You're too dedicated.
Well, we'll see what my supervisor thinks about that.
I think Manuel is missing in action. Who else is missing? Diana?
Joining us shortly. So
We're missing Dave. A lot of people. We
Okay.
have only
Nicholas, Casey, Mark.
we have Carolina, Mark, Joshua.
Oh, okay, there's more than that I'm not seeing.
Yeah. Hey, can you wait? Do you want to wait like 5 minutes?
No longer. I think we have
No
to.
longer. Need to have a lot to cover. Let's wait 2 minutes.
How long has this class been lasting on the other times we've done it? 2 hours?
Last time I finished at 9, to be honest.
No, 2 hours. That seems about right. I mean, you know, the in-person class when we've done it is pretty much the full day.
Oh man. So so you finish? Do you think you're going to finish at 9 or do you need more time?
Yeah, I think 9 to 9:30, somewhere in there.
All right. So it's better better we start, I guess. Okay.
I got 7:02.
All right, guys. So thank you for coming today. I know everybody's tired, anxious to finish this. This is week number 4. And I think historically, I mean, the majority of the people fail this topic, written standard. So really, this is the killer, to be honest with you. So we have today Dr. Mike Orfanedes. He's the grand guru of Graham standards. So he's the best speaker we have in town, to be honest. And he has so much passion and so much dedication, let me tell you. I mean, he's an amazing guy. And break his heart when they see this exam and people fail. I mean, he spent hours and hours and hours and when people fail, say, oh my gosh, what happened here? So again, this is the new way to do it, business. I mean, webinar and to do grading online. I don't know how going to do it, but hopefully it's going to work. I mean, I think it's easier, to be honest. No mosquitoes, no sun, no nothing. So, so this is easier. I think Kevin sent it to you some reminders on new dates. Remember you need to move the exam because we need to do some tweaking over there. So the exam is going to be December the 5th, the 5th one. And grade and standard is going to be December the 12th. So 9 to 12, I think. So you have more time to study. Maybe during Thanksgiving, you're going to study. So anyhow, Mike, all yours. The floor is yours. And really, guys, this is the killer. So really, you need to nail this portion because this is the very important one. So I'm going to shut up, okay, here. Mike, I think you can share your screen.
Okay.
And all yours.
I had a quick question. The exam is December 5th and the grades and standards part is December 12th. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Sorry, what time? In the morning, right? From 9 to 12?
Yeah, 9 to 12, 3 hours.
Okay.
Henry,
Thank
there's
you.
an email that you sent me about something on November 21st.
No,
sorry.
Yeah, forget that. Forget that. I mean, we met yesterday and we need to change because we are not ready. I mean, we are working hard. Diana is working very hard to put this in Qualtrics, this whole thing online. We need to mail you the exam, the plan review for the plan review. We need to make the copies and all the stuff. So we are not ready for this Saturday. So sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I didn't receive any email though about a change in the dates.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Yeah, me too. That's why I asked.
Okay, so we need to update the, can you put in the chat who didn't receive it? So I will make sure that Kevin sent to you guys tomorrow. All right, thank you.
I think it's a good move. This is Mike. I think it's a good move from the standpoint that it will give you guys more time to study. And, you know, with the numbers as they are going up, I think it's better to do this virtually. And so the last time we did an exam, COVID, it was in person, at least everything but the grades and standards. And actually we did one of them at the nursery. And so, you know, this way, and we're going to get you guys actual hard copy plans. We do have, Diana has put them into the electronic format, but you have to do a lot of magnification and then reduction, you know, to find the various parts of the plans. I mean, putting plans that are, you know, fit on a table into this computer screen is a bit of a feat. So I think the idea was to give you guys the real paper versions as backup. Anyway, I want to kick off the class tonight. So welcome those of you that are here. My name is Mike Orfanedes. I'm an extension agent with UF-IFAS Extension in Broward County. My office here in Davie tonight. Diana Ramirez is my assistant. She's going to kind of help with, I don't know, backstopping me and some things if we get some technical glitches, which can always happen when you're doing distance on Zoom. A lot of kids are doing homework tonight, and I don't know. Sometimes we have screens that freeze or we lose people, and so we're going to do our best to get through it. I'm not anticipating any problems, but it's a bit like getting on a flight across the country. You don't know what the weather's going to be like. So a little bit about me. I've been here for a long time at Extension Education in Broward. Henry actually was my program assistant years ago, and so he did very well and went on to get an agent position in Miami-Dade. Excuse me, that was my son. I was actually became a landscape inspector in 2000. So that was 18 years ago already, and was a urban forester for 3 years with the town of Davie, Florida. Here, didn't move far to take that other job. And I did that for a while, and that's where I honed my inspection skills. There's nothing like being an inspector, doing it for a living to really internalize this stuff. And so the first PowerPoint I'm going to go through with you is actually not all about grades and standards. It touches on it, but it's a little bit more of sort of my perspectives as I wound down my career with Davie and came back to Extension because I miss teaching. But it was a great experience. It really was. And it's a good certification. I highly recommend it. I'm also a certified arborist. And, so it kind of helps, cover several of the bases. As I was leaving my position in 2005 with the town of Davie, I wanted to put together a PowerPoint that I thought would kind of capture my experience as a inspector and the most frequent kinds of issues that came up as we would get our inspection tickets. And there were, anywhere from 3 or 4 up to maybe 8 to 10 per day back in the day. And we had to go out to all these properties. Some were commercial plazas and some were, residential homes. We did Riverstone and if you know Broward County, Davie anyway, Long Lake Ranches and a couple of Publixes and various kinds of situations. And so I wanted to kind of capture for you what I think were the most common reasons why inspections failed. And when they fail, that means the installer, the contractor did not meet some requirement of the plan. And so these are what some of the issues were. We would create a punch list. Sometimes trees would need to be replaced. Sometimes things could be remediated. And I had a lot of positive experiences. I had some very difficult situations. I was actually thrown off of a job once because they didn't like what I was telling them. And so anyway, they didn't get their CO, obviously. I had to come back eventually and, they had to do some more work, but, people can be difficult, but for the most part, I think a lot of this is communication up front. When you have your early meetings, back to site plan committee, landscape people need to be at the table. Unfortunately, you got water and sewer and fire and all those folks there and the engineers. The trees are never first on anybody's radar screen but the urban forester, the landscape inspector. And so, if things get too far down the track, sometimes it's hard to change course and get things the way you really think they ought to be. And it's also super important to go out. When you get a plan that comes in that you have to review, go out to the site and check things out because not everything is necessarily going to be shown on the plan. For example, we had a development over here off of Pine Island Road, and the existing tree line on the neighboring property was not shown on the plan. And so it was Mr. Aucamp was the installer, Jimmy Aucamp, great guy. He and his crew put these trees in. They were live oaks and they were planted in the shade of black olives that were 10 times the height. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but what I'm saying is these poor oak trees didn't have a shot at life because they were basically understory. And, at that point, I just asked if Jimmy, I said, look, I approved this plan, unfortunately, and I'm telling you, this is how it is. These trees don't have a prayer and where they are right now. And I really like to request a switch, a substitution, moving them to a different part of the property. He agreed to do that. He was very gracious about it. He cared about the town and having a good relationship with us, but I could not have required that. I mean, if he had decided, no, I'm going to do it per the plan and you can't change anything on me, I really wouldn't have had much ground to stand on. There were also issues sometimes where there were adjacent utilities on a neighboring property, all kinds of things come in. So I always say it's super important that the architect, the plan designer, and the inspector go out and meet with the contractor on site before any shovels go in the ground. Some other things, and these are just kind of the typical things I'd find in inspections. Deplanting was probably the most common error. The top of the first order route, which Joe Jimenez, he's the inspector in Davie now, his finger's pointing to the first order route. That's an anchor route. That's where the zone of rapid taper starts, where the trunk transitions into root. And you can see this tree was very much deeply planted. We had about probably 4 to 6 inches worth of trunk buried. And so, especially on berms, that's a common problem on a slope. And also know that trees are going to sink over time, especially if they're container grown and they have a lot of organic material in the container as opposed to field grown. They're going to sink, they're going to settle. And so I always require the UF planting detail, which shows a root ball that's elevated about 10%. But the bottom line is you should be able to see that zone of rapid taper, that trunk flare, maybe the top of that first order root should be right at about grade or certainly within 2 inches. And if it looks like a telephone pole in the ground, it's too deep. Why is that a concern? Well, think about it. Roots need to breathe. They need oxygen as much, if not more, than water. People think roots will grow in anything that's wet. Well, that's not really true. Trees get stressed if they don't have enough oxygen. So it's really critical to apply to apply the proper tree planting detail. And I recommended the UF planting detail, and that's what we required actually when I was with the town. Also on the mulch should never come in contact with the trunk. The trunk is not suberized tissue like the roots are, and hence it needs to be able to breathe and see the light of day. Grades and standards, which is really the focus of tonight, was also, of course, a common problem. Such things as codominancy, multiple trunks in the lower half of the tree make a tree subpar. And here's a good example on a pink tababuya. You've got a leader and another leader, or a branch that wants to be competing with the leader, and it's about 2/3 or larger than the leader itself. That becomes a codominant defect. And if it's in the lower half of the tree, that becomes a problem. It's not a number 1. Most plants require Florida grade number 1 or better. Now, if I was going to tag every tree that was codominant in the lower half to be removed, I'd be having a lot of trees removed. So, if the tree was fine otherwise, and this is where the subjectivity comes into play, I would maybe suggest that they subordinate this limb, reduce its size, reduce its ability to compete with the leader, and then I could pass the tree. Root problems are very common, unfortunately, and probably more so than canopy defects. Stem girdling roots, circling roots, trees that have been in containers too long. Some of these poor root systems go back to the liner and the early stage of production time frame. If those root defects are not corrected back then, they're never going to be corrected. And so, well, what's the downside of of a poor root ball? It's poor anchoring and instability problems. So if people sometimes say, well, why would a circling root cause a tree to lean? I said, well, did you ever try to stand up with your toes curled? Other common problems, and this is faulted perhaps more on the designer, but trees planted too close to infrastructure, lack of mature rooting space. We have to think ahead. You plant a poinciana or an oak tree in a small little cutout area that's 3 by 3. That's the, it's just the epitome of poor planning. Planting a gumbo limbo here, as our public works department did, much to my chagrin, less than 2 feet from a rec trail where bicyclists and equestrians and rollerbladers are going to be going back and forth. This doesn't make good sense. I did a lot of tree removal permits over those years, and I found that typically when there were conflicts with infrastructure, trees were planted closer than 5 feet. So I kind of had a benchmark of it has to be at least 5 feet set back from any type of hardscape, and that's really very much a minimum. Look at these slash pines that were planted along Griffin Road. Broward County, this is in Southwest Ranches. Good God, why would anyone put slash pines in a tiny little plantable area underneath an overhanging ficus hedge? It just never made much sense to me. So these are examples of poor planning. These are the kind of things that when you're reviewing plans, you need to flag. These trees, these gumbos should have been put farther back. And quite frankly, I probably wouldn't have put gumbos in this narrow area anyway. I would have chosen a smaller stature tree. Other things, poor staking technique. Yeah, you've got to have at least 3 ties, I think, on a tree. I don't find that 2 are adequate because the wind blows from multiple directions, especially if you're planting in the spring into summer. You're going to get some high wind events. It takes a I think on average about 3 to 4 months for a per inch of caliper for a tree to establish. So, you know, a 3-inch caliper live oak is going to be 9 to 12 months before it's established. Also, if you're on properties and you're, you know, after the fact, a lot of times we'll see Wellington tape strangling trees. We'll see the little metal bands that have fallen down to the base of the tree, and yet they have not been cut. The guys just pulled the stakes off. And so what happens over time, these will constrict the base of the trunk. They might even get covered up by mulch and nobody will ever know. But still, again, that's going to girdle the tree. Lack of vigor often was a problem where watering was not adequate. You know, that's what happened here. I can almost guarantee you there was only a little bit of life left in the main branches in the trunk. And so this tree defoliated. And then a few weeks later, this is all that was left. So if I was to get an inspection ticket and go out and look at this tree, I would fail it because there's just not much left. And we'll get into some of this as we go through the actual grading process. Sometimes trees will brown out if there's been a short period without water. And sometimes they'll come back. If water is provided again and it hasn't been too long, you may see the trees leafing back out. And so there, I used to do a green scratch test, and you know, there'd be some arm wrestling, some going back and forth with the contractor. Well, Mike, I'm really not sure I'm ready to replace these trees. You know, there's about $4,000 worth of plant material here that we're talking about you having me replace. And so if I'd go up and scratch the end of the twig with my finger or my pocket knife and it was green, if it scratched green, and if the limbs were limber or, you know, pliable and not going to snap, I'd give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, we'll do a reinspection in 2 weeks. Trunk defects is one of the grades and standards criteria. You know, if that wound is of any size, and we'll get into the details on those requirements, those benchmarks later, that's cause for concern. It could possibly be a major, or not a major, but a minor downgrade. We actually had one of these come in one of the emails this week questioning the grading of a tree that had a trunk wound that was significant. Now looking over here at this, what is this? Looks like it was a gumbo that was installed. Doesn't look like it has a very good trunk. I might fault it on that when I grade the trunk, but the other issue often with parking lot islands is the trees are not planted in the center. You know, if it's a third of the way over and 2/3 on this side, it looks bad. So I would sometimes flag those trees to be relocated, you know, adjust the planting location by simply digging a trench on this side and moving it over, no biggie. Lifting the trees and moving them over were, you know, real common, easy fixes. The guys can do that quite readily. Some of these other factors were a little more complex. I think I'm coming to the end here. Missing or dead plant material, your plan review, your plan is going to have a plant count on it. And while I think you probably don't have the time to count each and every clump of Fakahatchee, if it looks suspiciously sparse or looks like something was left out or maybe died, you know, that's kind of the case here. This looked really sparse to me. I'd go back to the plan and say, okay, how many Fakahatchee or whatever were required to be here? And if I count them up, then I might find that we were missing some plants. So I'd add that on my punch list. In this case over here, you know, the grass has died out. I'm not going to accept that. You know, that's totally just, you can't pass that. Remember, when you sign off on this, you're stating that your inspection has determined that this plan meets the criteria of the landscape plan. The project is been you know, put in place per plan. And if it's not the case, you know, then you could be faulted. So you need to feel good about it before you sign off on it. Don't feel the pressure to accept on something that is not on par. Here again was an example. This was, I think, Orange Grove. There at Flamingo and Orange Drive. There was missing mulch. Now, you know, I have every reason to believe that probably this was all mulched over at the time when the contractor installed the plant material, but then maybe somebody came along and worked on the pool pump or whatever this is and messed it all up. Okay, Well, I can't pass that. I am sorry. When it rains like crazy, like it did a few weeks ago, what's going to happen? This is all going to wash onto the nice pavered sidewalk. So I would add that. That needs to be touched up. Looks like we might have some dead plant material here, you know. Hey, you know, go after the pool guy, but it needs to be better. I'm not going to accept this. And in terms of mulching, again, you know, a lot of people will apply way too much mulch. We had an installer in my HOA. My God, he must have put on 3 bags of mulch per tree. I couldn't believe it. It only needs to be a couple of inches. And actually, the recommendation is to make the wall of the tree well, if you will, out of mulch. But that doesn't mean you're going to bury it. These I thought were quite excessive. These were out at the Plantation Golf Course a few years back. Really a ridiculous kind of waste of mulch, but probably could have gotten away with a third of that. Anyway, the last one is site degradation. If you're going to be doing a job on inspecting a site that was previously existing, maybe it's a renovation. You know, they often will come back in, you know, when they're doing a facade change, let's say on a shopping plaza, putting in new lighting or whatever, that triggers that the landscape code would come back in, you know, into play in terms of maintenance. Now, some cities do annual landscape maintenance and you know, inspections. I know the city of Weston does that. Every commercial property is inspected on an annual basis and required to be restored to what it was approved for. A lot of cities don't have that, but you know, site degradation, you've got existing trees that need tree protection. I always required that, especially here in Davie, where we have a lot of big old oak trees. Actually, prior to their clearing and grubbing permit, before anybody could take any heavy equipment or vehicles onto the property, I wanted tree fences, construction barriers, whatever you want to call them, erected. I had to sign off on that. That triggered, then they could go in and do their clearing and grubbing, but they had to stay the hell off of the roots of that tree, and we would usually require it out to the drip line. So site degradation like this is totally unacceptable. There's no reason why porta potties should be put under a tree that's, you know, on the plan to stay and remain. This should have all been cordoned off. These porta potties should have been put elsewhere. The guys who drive pickup trucks and heavy equipment like to park it in the shade. I'm just giving you a heads up. And so that too is a no-no, because these heavy vehicles and equipment can compact the soil. They can crack surface roots, and then we often see decline. And of course, grade changes are terrible for trees. You want to kill an oak or a slash pine, just change the grade on it. So lots of things to be thinking about here, and some, you know, hard lessons learned. I remember when we did Grand Oaks over here, magnificent old Pine Island Ridge tree canopy, and we had done a lot with the contractor there to protect the trees that were the majority of them to remain. And lo and behold, at the end of the day, everything came down. We thought we were done, and then the cable TV and the utilities came through and trenched through our area, which we had previously protected. I was practically jumping out of my skin over that one. So you need to be on top of these people. You need to be going to the site periodically. Let me tell you, those tree fences will come down. Somebody decides they don't like it and they want to park their vehicle there, and they run over it, or they take it down for a few days, and then now you don't have any protection. All right, so I think at this point I'm going to, let's see here. I'm going to get out of this. This is another part of a PowerPoint. Let me just say this. If you're going to do a limb removal on a tree, remember the branch collar needs to stay on the tree, and we don't want flush cuts, okay? Flush cuts expose trunk wood, and that's not a good thing. In fact, it's a downgrade on the grades and standards. So I think at this point, I'm going to exit out of this particular presentation and get into the other one. Are there any questions?
Not yet.
No, not yet. Yeah.
Mike, I have a question.
Sure.
So back to the tree staking. I mean, that's been going on for as long as I've been doing this business. People putting Wellington tape, 2x4s here. Let me, I'll put my screen on too. Wellington tape 2x4s. The installer does that, right? So who comes back and takes that stuff off? The installer does not, because you guys don't make them. I mean, I'm not pointing at you, but nobody makes the installer go back and take it off. Me, as like the maintenance guy, I'm not going around cutting off Wellington tape from 300 trees and taking off 2x4s from 500 sable palms. So why doesn't something change, like where if the guy's going to get the job, the landscaper, incorporate that into their price, that, hey, this company needs to come back within 6 months or 1 year and remove all of the staking material?
Well, I think that's a great question. And, I wish we had more of that in place than we do. Some of the cities like Plantation does require a 1-year post-installation inspection, at which time they catch a lot of that. And so that's got to pass in order for the, I guess it's like a TCO, a temporary certificate of occupancy that's based upon that 1-year post-inspection. And in Weston, I know because they do the annual inspections anyway, they're going to catch it there. Here in Davie, we didn't have either requirement. And I'll be honest with you, it's been a problem. In fact, if you really want to know, when I went to lunch up at the Publix here on Nova Drive this afternoon to get my lunch, there was a tree at the bank there. The bank is now vacant, by the way. I don't know why they've closed it, but I've been keeping my eye on this little live oak tree that was a replacement, and it's had Wellington tape on it for almost 2 years now. And I took my pocket knife out and cut it all off today.
You saved a life.
I just did it. I'm like, hurricane season has got to be over. It's almost Thanksgiving, and so I'm getting the knife out, and I did it.
But a lot of trees will fail because of that Wellington tape. It just absolutely strangles them, and the branches will snap there. It makes it a super weak point. And I think it's just a simple fix, to save a tree. Yeah, you go around planting at the correct, depth and getting that perfect root ball, the nice roots, not circling a central leader. However, you're leaving the Wellington tape on. So
I see it, or the bow ties, they come through and cut them off, but they leave we call it a bow tie around the trunk.
yeah.
It's a problem, especially in homeowner associations, where unless the property manager is on top of things or they have a certified arborist on their board, a lot of times, that kind of stuff happens. So,
Right.
anyway, good question. Yeah, we need.
I just wish that something could be done in the future, like everybody kind of gets together. Hey, this is the post.
I got another.
Have you?
Some cities have banned Wellington tape. Plantation is one of them, and they require sisal. In Sunrise, William Burns, he's the urban forester there. Peggy Machine is also his assistant. And they've gone to, he calls it a donut. They make a donut, if you will, out of like burlap, and that's what they tie around the trunk. And then they loop the Wellington tape and tie it onto the burlap donut, not the trunk. And so what the scenario is, over time, the burlap just decomposes and it all falls to the ground. So that's
the way that I do it too. I use the sisal twine or the burlap, but most guys don't. They just run the Wellington tape because it's easier. It's quick.
I'll say this, and I as much as I hate Wellington tape, I still use it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Take trees, especially those that are. Well, we got one over here at the Bridal Veil today, and the wind had knocked it crooked, and I was trying to straighten it up a little bit with some Wellington tape. But I want to move on to the grades and standards. So it's 7:30. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Is
Yes.
it okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks a little different to me than it did with the first PowerPoint. So, I never know what you guys are able to see. Anyway, I want to go on with this. So what I'm going to be covering tonight is the 2015 grades and standards procedure. I want you to know that there is a committee that does grades and standards for hardwood trees, a different committee that does palms. And then I think they have yet another committee because there are grades and standards for shrubs, ground covers, and actually aquatic plants too. Tonight, all I'm going to be talking about is trees. And I'm using the 2015 revision because that's the one that we've been using all along. Since then, it was rolled out in 2015 with great pomp and fanfare. ISA and Extension and Dr. Gilman, Ed Gilman was our professor of arboriculture, along with the folks at FDAX, rolled the 2015 out in several different locations around the state. And interestingly, there was a committee that was meeting last winter to revise it yet again. And we went from 10 steps in the, I think it was the 2006 or 5 version, to 7 steps. They simplified it to make it easier to utilize. And I think it was, for the most part, an improvement. There were a few things I didn't like about it, but that's neither here nor there. And apparently there was an effort to make some additional changes in the winter of 2019-2020. So that committee met. I think there may be some new information available on the web about the revision, the 2019-2020, but as far as I'm aware of, there have not been any formal rollouts. I think primarily because of the virus. And, we may in a few short months be looking at a different grades and standards for our certification program. But at this point, I want to just, we're going to continue on with the 2015 for the time being. So William Burns, who's the president of our Landscape Inspectors Association, put this PowerPoint together. I have added to it and amended it a little bit, but I want to give him credit because he put a lot of work into this, and we've used it all over the state of Florida when we put this program on the road. So I want to start with just some general concepts. The trunk structure is huge. You should know that the #1 reason why trees fail in Florida, per the tree failure reporting program, has to do with the trunk structure, weaknesses in the structure of the trunk, how the tree is built and put together. And you're going to hear a lot about codominancy, which means multiple trunks, and bark inclusions. Bark is included or trapped inside of a crotch or a union. It's pinched, and that's a pressure point, right? Trunks not only get taller or elongate, they get wider, fatter, they increase in diameter, radial spread. And so they will eventually meet in the middle, given enough time, and then they develop these inclusions or pinch points, as I call them. It's a very common site of failure. Ouch! Dr. Gilman used to be always talking about the trees that fall down and go boom. I think that was what his daughter, being a tree geek like me, he probably exposed his kids to too much tree talk. I still get grief from my wife about it. In fact, just this past weekend, she's like, can't you stop talking about codominancy? So anyway, this is why it matters, because big trunks of trees that fall down and go boom can cause big problems and lawsuits and lawyers and payouts and insurance hikes and insurance companies dropping you and requiring you not to have trees near your house anymore and all kinds of horrible things. So most of the trees that fail, my daughter's neighborhood up in Atlanta, just a couple of months ago, what was it? That one storm that came through, we missed it. They got it. I don't remember the one. It went through New Orleans, I think, or Louisiana. Went on up right through North Georgia. She had a neighbor 3 doors down, had 3 trees fall on their house. And it was during the night, and the kids were in bed. Thank God nobody was injured. I still think it's a miracle, but can you imagine? They came right through the roof. So there's an example of what's left of about half of a tree. This could have been totally prevented had proper pruning, proper production of a tree been done. It's not, when you build a house in the woods, well, it is what it is. And interestingly, we've observed, and Dr. Gilman always taught, that trees in the forest have a pretty low rate of codominancy because light is limiting. They're crowded. They're growing in close proximity to one another. I just took some pictures this weekend of up around Tallahassee of a forest of damn near all single leaders. And I'm like, how does that just happen by itself? And then we plant our trees out here in full sunlight with fertilizer and irrigation and pampering, and they get lots of crazy codoms. It's because of the light. The light is abundant. And I have always said, when it comes to trees, he who sees the light gets big. And so if you got 4 or 5 limbs that are getting a lot of light, they're all going to get big and become crowded. And so the cracks that form. Here's a perfect example of a pinch point of an inclusion. Again, they are going to appear as a valley. They're turned inward. A lot of arborists, when we look at trees, below the inclusion is often a stem bark ridge, which is more of a, it's a raised area, and that's not an inclusion. It's where it's rolled in on itself. Okay, there's no attachment. The bark is pinched inside the crotch. So as we think about the grading procedure, there are 7 steps. Diana emailed to you guys tonight the matrices. We use 3 matrices, 1, 2, and 3. I'll be introducing those shortly, but you should have them in your email. I have them in this PowerPoint, so you don't really have to download them and print them out right now. We're gonna cover that, but she also emailed to you a tree grading form or sheet. It's a short form, and that would be nice to have tonight, although not required, but it is the actual form you will be tested on. It looks like this, okay? And it's got the final grade on the back. And that's what we're going to practice tonight after we go over these 7 steps. So step 1 out of 7 is choose the appropriate tree matrix type. There are 3 matrices in the 2015 grades and standards. We used to have 5. They simplified it. We have matrix 1, which is tall and wide trees. We have matrix 2, which is tall and narrow. And we have matrix 3, which are the short and wides. And if you get a copy of the grades and standards, which you can Google to Florida Grades and Standards, you'll have several different sites come up. You can download it for free. You can print it out. You can find it on your phone. The Florida Grades and Standards, you can download this document and you can print it out. And it's got lots of wonderful photos, lots of examples of how to grade trees. It's got a glossary in it that talks about terms that like included bark and codominancy and flush cuts and all that. What else has it got? Oh, it's got the matrices by species. If you want to know what a catalpa tree is in North Florida, you can look up the matrix under catalpa down here, or redbud up down here. You could find out, what's a calophyllum, which matrix does a calophyllum fall into. We also talk about multi-trunk trees, not bonsai, but I'm thinking more like ligustrum and maybe crepe myrtles. So some examples of tall and wide trees would be red maple, live oak, gumbo limbo, mahogany, the big canopy trees, okay? The tall and narrow or the smaller trees that don't get huge size on them, things like some of the hollies, for example, would fall into that category, or some of the Italian cypress, certainly. And then the short and wide would be things like crepe myrtle, ligustrum. Those are often multi-trunked. Actually, these are here too, but of course, crepe myrtles can come as standards. Excuse me, by the way, I'm not a big fan of crepe myrtles in South Florida. I don't think they do very well. If they come in on a plan, I would suggest you try to find a replacement for them. There is a tropical crepe myrtle, the Queen's crepe myrtle, but it gets much significantly larger in size. But there are some nice alternatives to crepe myrtle. They don't like our high pH, low organic matter soil. That's the problem with crepe myrtles here, and especially the reds. So Bill's thrown in here a few examples of other tropical trees for South Florida, like the poinciana, which probably, in my opinion, would be in the number 1 matrix. The cypress or some of these more upright columnar evergreens are going to be in matrix 2. Tababuya, interestingly, some of them can get quite large, but they're actually in matrix 3. And the tree we're going to grade tonight, guys, is a pink tababuya. So we'll be referring to matrix 3. So that's the first step, is identify your matrix. Okay. Now you're probably thinking, good God, how am I going to do this on a job site? You're going to learn to kind of internalize some of this stuff, and you'll know you're going to learn it if you do enough of it. It's kind of like learning a foreign language, but again, the matrix can be easily downloaded on your phone. So for multi-trunk small maturing trees such as crepe myrtle and Rax privet, that's ligustrum, measure the container size or root ball you are grading and ignore the caliper. All right. That's just to simplify it. You know, it's got all the codoms, or not codoms, the multiple trunks. They're basically for all other trees, you're going to measure the caliper. Now, where do we measure the caliper? Anybody know?
4.5 feet above the root base.
Okay, that would be 54 inches or diameter breast height. That's actually not correct.
6 inches.
It's 6 inches for trees up to and including 4 inches in caliper. We measure it at 6 inches above grade. Now, if the tree is planted deeply, that's going to complicate things a little bit, but you know, you're going to basically ballpark it. So 6 inches above grade, you're going to put your caliper tool, the little plastic ones, you can pick them up at some of the tree shows. I usually get some, like Cherry Lake puts some out, Marshall Trees, other groups have put the little tree calipers out. You can use a diameter tape, just the same, either one. So you're going to measure the caliper of the tree, and that's super important because you're going to see that that's going to be what drives our other parameters that are in the matrix, and we'll get to that in a minute. Now, if the tree is larger than 4 inches in diameter at that point, well, we're going to then make our measurement at 12 inches. I know it seems odd, it seems inconsistent, but it is what it is. So 4 inches and under, it's going to be measured, the caliper at 6 inches above grade. For trees larger than that, 12 inches above grade. Okay. Step 2. And by the way, this sheet that I emailed you, we're going to be following this. All of these steps are right on here. And you're just going to follow along and check things off. And we have an example of this coming up. So step 2 is to grade the trunk. Now, this is where codominancy comes into play. If the trunk divides into 2 nearly equal diameter stems in the upper 10% of the tree is not downgraded to a Florida number 1. There are 4 grades. Fancy is the highest grade. The next lower grade is Florida number 1. That's most of the time what architects and designers spec is the second grade, the Florida number 1. The one below that is the Florida number 2. That is not acceptable on most plans. And the lowest grade is cull. Those trees should not be planted, and maybe except in a mitigation area, or they may need to go back to the nursery for some additional correction. So a tree with 1 dominant trunk is graded Florida Fancy, and you see some examples here. In all cases, the terminal end of the leader, the main leader is the highest point in the tree. There can be no branches that are higher than the main trunk. And you don't really have any major competing branches, except possibly in the upper 10%. Now, we had some, how would I put this? Some heated debate with some of the growers and some of the inspectors about this issue in the past. Inspectors downgrading Florida Fancy trees because they had a codominancy in the very tippy top. And that this was determined to not be a downgrading factor. So you can have 2 equally sized leaders, if you will, in the top 10%, but no lower. Now, a Florida grade number 1 tree can divide into 2 nearly equal diameter trunks, codominancy in the upper half of the tree. Okay. So here you see an example. We have a trunk that divides. We call that a codominancy or a bifurcation, but it's in the upper half. If you look at the base of the tree at the soil level and the top of the tree, and you kind of ballpark it to where the midpoint is, if that break occurs above the midpoint, the tree is a number 1 and can be accepted with the codominant condition intact. There's another, but again, the main trunk must be the highest point of the tree. Now, if it's not, you can simply ask the installer to make a little reduction cut over here. I did that a lot. I just a little bit of pruning and we could get these things to pass. So that's the Florida grade number 1 tree. The number 2, that's a situation where the bifurcation is in the lower half. That's not acceptable. So why do you think they make that distinction? Why can you accept the codominancy in the upper half but and not in the lower half?
I guess the lower half is like more tempted to break the tree because it doesn't have enough, like the structure is not good enough to support the two
Well, I think, yeah, I think
the two branches.
the issue is uncorrected. This can really become a problem. You're going to develop an inclusion a lot sooner here than you are going to up here. You see that? So, you know, even a number one is not a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world, but accepting something like this where an inclusion may form within a few years, as opposed to up here where it might be 10 years out, it's a big difference. So some other downgrading factors could be a dog leg in the clear trunk zone. You see the dog leg here? Dog leg is when the trunk has a kick in it and it's offset by more than the diameter of the trunk at the point where the kick begins. Okay, you see that? You cannot downgrade, however, for a dog leg in the canopy portion of the tree. This was another pet peeve of some of the growers. And it actually came to a head. We had to have a conference in 2006, I'm dating myself, and we brought inspectors and growers and installers and all these folks together. There were, I don't remember, maybe over 100 people that came to our campus here in Davie. We had growers that donated trees from Dade County, from Palm Beach County. We don't have that many big tree growers in Broward. We'd have a few, but anyway, we came to have a meeting of the minds with Dr. Gilman and to kind of sort this out because it became quite contentious. There was a perception that some of the inspectors were kind of really out of line. That was from the grower's perspective, and some of the inspectors felt that, you know, some of these growers were just trying to pass off subpar material and, you know, we know better than that and we're just not going to take it. And you had situations where, you know, maybe inspections weren't too rigorous in one city and they were much more so in another. And there were trees that were basically, you know, failed in one city and installed in another. And that's not a good thing either, you know. So we had this big meeting of the minds, and when all was said and done, I think there was improved communication, and I think it's forever been improved, maybe not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. But it's also, the onus is on the inspectors to follow the grades and standards and not their own personal pet peeves, you know. And so, you know, it kind of works both ways. Another factor that might limit the grade of a tree, making it a number two, would be to have multiple trunks in the upper half. Remember with the Florida grade number one, we just have one bifurcation. You know, with the Florida grade number two in the upper half, we've got multiple. The point here is it's just going to take a lot more work to correct this condition. Okay. So now I would often allow these trees to remain with a hardy subordination, as we call it, or a reduction cut. And you really can't see that on this particular example, but it would be a case where, let's say there was a limb that came out here. I would have them prune out this upper part back to the lower limb, always back to another limb, not a stub cut, not a hat rack. And I could sometimes pass these trees. I'm going to tell you guys, you got to learn to pick your battles, and you're not going to get everything you want. You have to be you know, to some extent, you have to work with these folks. And there may be, well, here's a perfect example. We had a plan that we approved that we shouldn't have, that showed gumbo limbos in a pan, in a dry retention area, and cypress were planted on the berm. This was at the Publix on Sterling Road. And I went out to do the inspection. I didn't review the plan, I don't believe. And I'm like, oh my God. We've got gumbo limbos down. They're going to be underwater, you know, half the summer. And we've got cypress trees that should be in the pan up on the berm. We need to flip this. And, you know, the plan had been approved. And here again, you know, we didn't go out and check things out. And apparently the architect didn't either. And so it was a very glaring error. And again, the contractor worked with us and he flipped them. He took the gumbos up out of the pan, put them on the berm, and put the cypress down in the pan. So we sweated that one out. But so, you know, you got to pick your battles. You've got to try, it just, if there's some trees that are a little deep, not super deep, maybe you're going to let that go. That's where the subjectivity in all of this comes. And if you've got multiple people on your team doing inspections, I suggest you take them out and do some practice ones together so that you are on the same page. One of the reasons I got thrown off the star, it was a North Star out on Hiatus Road, is because they felt I was being too stringent, and my inspectors that also worked with me down the road were letting stuff go, and that was not the case. Anyway, long story short, we did go out and we did periodically do practice inspections just to make sure we were on the same page, and I think that helped. And then the last grade, the lowest grade, of course, is cull, and that's a situation where you have a very deformed tree, or in terms of its trunk structure, or it has multiple trunks in the lower half. Remember, we had multiple trunks in the upper half for the number 2, multiple trunks in the lower half for the cull. And so cull trees really do not belong on permitted job sites. They should go back to a nursery, put on a burn pile, or maybe put in a mitigation area. All right, are there any questions on grading the trunk? That's step 2. So on your form, and I should have this in the PowerPoint, you've determined the matrix in step 1, you've now determined the trunk structure, and you're given a choice of Florida Fancy, number 1, number 2, or cull. You just simply circle which of the 4 it is. And then we move on to the 3rd step, which is grading the uniformity of the crown, which is the canopy. There are only 2 choices here, and this is one of the things I did not like about the revision. It used to be we had all 4 choices for this step. In fact, there were 2 steps in grading the crown. They simplified it into grading it as 1 step, which I think made sense because, quite frankly, the majority of canopy that you're going to be looking at the installation stage is mostly temporary canopy. If you think about it, street trees are limbed up to about 14 feet typically over roadways. So at least in that situation, if your trees are coming in at 12 to 14 feet, everything you're looking at, your grading is temporary. So that was the decision to kind of condense it into 1 step and give it either a yes or a no, a yay or a nay. And what I don't like is it's a fancy or a number 2. And one of the recommendations I made to the committee, I unfortunately was not put on the hardwood committee. I don't know why, and it's not my business, but they did offer me a position on the palm committee, but I'm really much more into the hardwoods. So I submitted some comments, and they were happy to get those. I said I'd like to have 4 steps here, 4 choices. You've taken away our choices, and we only have 2 choices here. But no biggie. It's either yes or no, fancy or number 2, and these are all acceptable. The canopies are relatively balanced, relatively uniform, not perfect, but that's okay. Again, this is temporary canopy. These, however, these schematics are really not acceptable. They're kind of one-sided, large voids in the canopy. The tree might have been on the end of the line or smashed up against another one or a building, or, maybe they were limbs that broke off in transit. So these would be unacceptable. So step 3 is either a yes or a no. It's acceptable or it's not. Okay, any questions on that, step 3? So there is no number 1 or cull, it's only fancy or number 2. So again, on your tree grading form, you're going to have those choices, and you simply circle whichever it is. Now the easiest step is step 4, and it's simply what is the lowest grade you've given this tree so far. And if it failed on trunk structure, then that's where it is. It's a number 2. Even if it has a gorgeous canopy, or just the inverse. If it had a very nice fancy or number 1 trunk structure, but it fails on crown uniformity, it's a number 2 there. You could essentially stop the grading procedure altogether right then and there. And you tag the tree for either remove and replace, or if you felt that there was some remediation possible, such as shortening a codominant leader to the point where it's no longer a threat to the leader, then that's going to be a remediation. And so I typically use green tape for remediable trees and orange tape or pink tape for trees that had to be replaced. And all this is going to be noted probably today. Everybody's putting this stuff into their phone. Back in the day, we had, paper, had carbon paper on a carbon copy kind of thing. And then we would turn those in, of course, at the end of the day to the building department. So yeah, again, if the tree was still passing, it was still in good shape, you would move on to steps 5, 6, and 7. And what are those? This is where it gets a little more complicated. So you've determined, let's say you have a decent trunk structure, you have a reasonable crown on the tree is acceptable. Let's look a little further, drill down a little bit deeper. So we have step 5, our major downgrades. Now there's a cue card that summarizes all of this that we would like to get to you. I want to make it, I have a picture of it coming up. You're going to see it. They're laminated. They're kind of narrow and fit in your pocket. So all these steps are summarized. So if you're kind of beginning to get a little bewildered about it all, trust me, it seems academic, but the presentation, I want to point out all the details. So major downgrades are step 5. If one of the following statements is true, reduce the grade determined in step 4 by 1. So if you're at a Florida number 1 at step 4, and any of these 5 statements are true, you're now at a number 2. If you were at 2, you probably would have stopped the grading, but let's say you were going to allow remediation. Because it's just subordinate that codominant and we'll be good with good to go. Well, you might have an issue here. So that's why we want to continue the process. Tree does not meet the height requirement. Here's where the matrix comes into play. Okay. And so let me fast forward and show you what the matrix looks like. Okay, here's the tree grading cue card. Okay. Again, all of this is summarized on this little laminated pocket, slip in your pocket kind of, put it on your clipboard, little cheat sheet, really. And it's provided to us courtesy of Roots Plus growers, ACT growers, the International Society of Arboriculture, and of course, good old UF IFAS Extension. So what you see here are all of these steps that I'm at. I'm at step 5 right now. And then this is this sheet that I was telling you about, the tree grading form, which you now have in your email. And this is the matrix, okay? So let's look at the matrix. This is type 3. That's the one we're going to use tonight. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint procedure here in a minute. I just want to show you what the matrix looks like. It lists the tree caliper that you determined in step 1, correct? 1.5 inches all the way down to 6. That captures the majority of trees that will be installed on your job sites. They're in 1/2 inch increments, 2 inches, 2.5, 3, 3.5, and so forth. Is everybody with me? Guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I can't see
Yes.
you, so, I'm just hoping I'm not talking to myself. That's happened before too. So everything is a function of the caliper. That's why it's so important that we get that down first. So let's say it's a 3-inch caliper. Then we're going to look at the metrics that are required for a tree of that caliper. The tree height must be greater than or equal to 7 inches. The crown diameter, these are the things we're going to be getting into in steps 5 and 6. The crown diameter on a 3-inch caliper needs to be 42-inch minimum. The root ball diameter, if it's a field-grown tree, balled and burlap, needs to be 32 inches diameter or a 45 gallon. So here's another thing. You're going to need to know your container sizes, and you're going to have to guesstimate these. And some of the cities do inspections on the truck or right off the truck prior to installation. Then they'll come back and do another inspection post-installation. In Davie, we only did post-installation, so I was frequently kind of guessing at the root ball size. There are some ways you can determine that even after the tree is in the ground. One of those ways is by trying to shake the tree a bit and you can see where the root ball is. But in an ideal world and for the purposes of our exam and our class, you're going to be able to see the container. They're all going to be container sized trees. So for that, what was I using? 3-inch caliper tree, we're going to be looking at a minimum of a 45 gallon. Okay. So now that you're familiar with the matrix, and this is just matrix 3, remember there's a different matrix for type 2 and a different one yet for type 1 because the tree sizes are going to be different. So now I'm going to go back to where we were, step 5. And again, we're looking to see if any one of the following statements is true. And if it is, we will reduce the grade determined in step 4 by 1. If 2 or more of these are true, then we can downgrade it by 2. So it could go from a fancy to a number 2 if 2 of these were correct. Okay, so what are those? A, tree does not meet the height requirement. Okay, well, the matrix said it needed to be how high? I've got it in front of me. So for that
Minimum of 7 foot.
7 feet, 7 feet. Okay, crown does not meet the diameter requirement. Again, we go back to the matrix. We said it was 42 inches, so it's got to be a minimum. Now, you're not going to be probably taking a tape measure or some kind of a measuring stick out there. You're going to be eyeballing this. And, you know, if we were doing the class in person, and you'll see in the slides, we do actually use a measuring stick, but you're going to be eyeballing this stuff, guys. Number 3 or C, root ball is not secure enough to successfully transplant. Well, if it's still in the container, and we had one of these trees in the last class, it was a jacaranda, and when you pull on the trunk, you push the tree, you pull the tree in different directions. The tree and the container, the root ball should move as one, right? If the container doesn't move, but the tree does, that's not good. What could that mean? The tree moves, but the container doesn't when you shake it.
Or root system.
Yes, a poor root system. It could be either one of 2 things. It could be a gnarly old circling root situation where you had a tree that was in a container, the previous, or maybe the 3 or the 7 gallon or the 15 too long, and it got very root bound. And then when they stepped it up, they just stuck it in a 45 and covered it all up. That's not going to work. That tree is not going to be able to expand and explore and establish the entire volume of that container. It's going to be kind of imprisoned in that gnarly mess of roots. That tree is a cult. We'll get to that in step 7. But this is
Mike, what's the height requirement on a 3-inch? It's 8 foot, no?
it's 7 feet, minimum of 7 feet.
Are you? I thought it goes up a foot every half an inch.
Take a look. 7 feet. And if you
You got 2 inch is 6 foot and 2.5 inches 6 foot.
right.
Yours is maybe yours is just wrong.
I don't know. This comes right out of the official document. So,
So 2.5 feet or 2.5 inch should be 7 feet, right? And the 3 inch should be
no,
8.
I would go by this, guys. I mean, this has been approved. So,
The one I have is different that you sent me. That's weird.
really, are you sure you have type 3? Or are you looking at type 1?
It's the same exact. I don't know.
Type 3 matrix? I mean, whatever I emailed you guys or Diana emailed you came up.
Oh, okay.
Type 3 short and wide.
Okay, move along.
Yep. So see, there are variables in here that take into account the mature shape and conformation of the tree. Good question, though. Hey, we're all just learning together tonight. So anyway, that's a red flag. Either that root ball is compromised because it's pot bound, or it could be they just shifted that tree up into that 45 and they're charging you for a 45 when in reality you're getting a smaller tree. So those are the 2 scenarios I've come across when the root ball is not secure. And so I wouldn't pass that. Now, it's more difficult once the tree's in the ground. It's got the Wellington tape and the stakes on it. How far can you shake it? So that's one of the situations where it's better to be able to make the trees fire. But anyway, root ball or container is undersized. Again, we go to the matrix. And so for that 3-inch caliper tree, we said it was a 45. When we were in the economic downturn, I guess the one prior to COVID, what was that? 2008, 2009, and 10 all in. This was a huge, huge problem. Trees were not selling. Nobody had any money, and nurseries were laying people off, and a lot of trees got pot bound. And there was obviously some work still going on, and I remember across the parking lot here, they put some mahoganies in that had damn near 3-inch calipers, and they were in 25s. I kid you not, that was not an uncommon situation, and those should have been 45s. But I don't know, today the situation isn't, well, it's not quite what it was back then. But anyway, that's the fourth part of this, step 5. And the last one is, this is interesting. Tree with a trunk caliper larger than 2 inches requires a stake to hold the trunk erect. Excuse me. In the version of the grades and standards back in 2005, this used to be 1 inch, but they increased the size to 2 inches. Which is, you know, I mean, they're free to do what they want to do, but it was, I think it was a little bit of a carrot to the growers. But, you know, I'm okay with it. The issue I have with this, I think the most important thing for an inspector to realize is that unless the tree training stake is off the tree, it's really hard to determine this, isn't it? Yet I know an awful lot of jobs that get passed with the training stakes intact, still in the tree. They're stuck in the root ball. The tree is still tethered to the stake. And I've seen whole plaza parking lots full of these kind of things. And we go back to the point that one of you guys made early on. So when does it come off? If the inspector doesn't require it to come off at the inspection, and there is no post-installation inspection like you have in Plantation or Weston, that stake may never come off. And it will become embedded in the root ball, embedded in the trunk. I see it fairly frequently, and then that's a real issue. There was a story some years ago of a kid, a girl, who climbed a tree that had a piece of rebar partially embedded in the trunk, which was a ficus tree, presumably was part of a training stake at one point. The little girl fell out of the tree and was badly injured because she struck that rebar. Or think about after a bad storm and that tree needs to be cut down and cut up. The guy with the chainsaw hits that training stake or the remnants of it, or even that piece of rubber hose or whatever. Kickback, big problem. So the only time I would allow this to persist, you know, leave the stake on the tree and pass the tree, was in the case of a few very special situations, one of which might have been clusia, because you know how rubbery they are. They're kind of floppy, and also silver buttonwood standards. Silver buttonwood standards, I honestly don't believe really want to be or ever should probably be. I love them, but they need to be staked for quite a while. And the other thing you should know is if you leave the stake on the tree, not only does it become a nuisance or a safety issue, it also makes the tree lazy. You know, trees actually would prefer or do better if we didn't stake them, but because we have high wind events around here, we absolutely have to do that, but we don't need to leave the training stake on the tree. And so that's what's important about this fifth part E in step 5, okay? So if none of these are a factor, if the tree passes all of these, then you continue on with the grade the same that you gave it in step 4. Everybody with me? We're getting to the end, guys. I know the home
Yes, sir.
coming up. So we're going to do a practice one of these. I got about 8:12, so we're pretty much on schedule. So step 6. Now these are a little more, I don't know, niggling issues, a little maybe smaller potatoes, but they're still significant. And so here we're going to need 2 statements that are true to reduce the grade determined in step 5 by one grade. So 1 grade reduction if 2 statements are true. So I call these the minor downgrades, whereas in step 5, those were the major downgrades. Now, it's interesting, if 3 or more are true, you reduce the grade by 2. Okay, well, let's take a look at what some of these are. A, flush cuts were made when pruning branches from the trunk. Does everybody know what a flush cut is?
Yes.
Or a branch stub, which is just the opposite.
Yes.
A flush cut is when you cut the limb too short and you actually expose the wood of the trunk. And if you know anything about arboriculture, you know that a branch collar should remain on the tree. I'm going to fast forward to some slides to show you an example of that. Okay, there. I would consider that probably a flush cut. Okay, there are a lot worse examples. There is some wound wood forming here, but it's kind of minimal here. It's not a horrible thing, but it might be considered a minor downgrade. But remember, we need 2 true statements to reduce the grade here in this step. So that's it. A is flush cuts were made, and it can be 1 or more. It doesn't. If you have 2 or 3, it doesn't make it any more. It's 1 is the same as 2 or 3. They didn't get into the specifics of that. So just be looking for flush cuts. I don't see them all that often, but once in a while. Branch stubs, that's easily dealt with. You can just require those be removed. Flush cuts is a little harder. Open trunk wounds are evident. A lot of times we find these in trees that have been transported and got beat up pretty bad, or sometimes the tether line that that's in the nursery that the trees are tied to, so they don't blow down. If they're not tied correctly and the trunk is up against that heavy gauge metal wire, whatever you want to call it, that will wound a tree. But the wounds are considered open when they are greater than 10% of the trunk circumference and or more than 2 inches tall. So here again, some inspectors get a little crazy and they will downgrade a tree because of surface abrasions, scuffs, minor cracks, scratches. Those are not downgradable defects. It has to be an open wound greater than 10% of the trunk circumference and or more than 2 inches tall. Now why 2 inches and not 3, or why 2 inches and not 1 inch? I don't know. Guys, this stuff is, they plan this around a table. It's a committee of horticulturists, experts, academics, folks that are in the industry and regulatory. And, you got to draw the line in the sand somewhere. All right, a few more minor downgrade conditions. More than 10% of the crown exhibits necrosis. That means dead, like maybe it dried out or browned out, or chlorosis, which means it's yellow, or damage from pests, diseases, or tip dieback, which is common with drought. Okay. The crown is thin and sparsely foliated. Please realize in the wintertime, some of these trees, crepe myrtle is an example, cypress. In late winter, it could be any of our hardwood trees may not have foliage on them because they're dormant or they're going through their seasonal changeover. I got a call one time from a landscape guy who was working at the Seminole Hard Rock Cafe, and there was some cypress trees planted around the dumpster area, I guess, and they browned out. And the folks that were running the Hard Rock called the landscaper in and said that the trees were dead and he needed to replace them. Well, it was, I don't know, February or whenever. And he called me up. He says, "I can't believe this." He says, "These trees are not dead. They're just going through their seasonal changeover." And we laughed about it. And I explained to him, well, you need to do the green scratch test and show them that these are deciduous trees. And then I got to thinking about it. My God, the people running the Hard Rock Cafe, Seminoles ought to know better than that. So anyway, just recognize that there is a dormant season and that there's a spring flush and you guys know that, but sometimes you never know. Finally, there is included bark between the trunk and major lateral branch or between main trunks. Remember I said the tree failure reporting program said codominance and bark inclusions. The combination is the #1 reason that trees fail in Florida. So we don't really talk about included bark when we are grading the trunk. We talk about codominancy, but because included bark is an issue, they did want to put it in somewhere. And so they put it in here in the minor downgrade section. Now you could argue, well, maybe that's a major downgrade. That's not what the grades and standards says. They say it is a minor downgrade. So The last one is trunks and or major branches are touching. We know that when trunks or major branches touch and rub against each other, they cause wounds, and wounds can eventually become portals for infection, fungal diseases and whatnot. So I had more problems with this step with ligustrum than any other species. And this was a big hurdle for me because I really hated to pass ligustrum that had the crossing rubbing limbs. That just really, that got under my skin. If you feel strongly about something, you can make that a requirement when you do your plan review. If you get it in the plan, you could put in the plan that there should be $10 bills all over the foliage. You can put that in your plan and see if you get it approved. But these requirements can be whatever you want. But from a grades and standards standpoint, I'm telling you, if this is the only issue, you know, you can't make them do it unless it's already in your plan, your planting notes or whatever, you know, you have as a companion. Because this is only one minor downgrade. So if this is the only issue, you can always ask, but you can't require. Sometimes inspectors get in trouble when they claim certain things are in the grades and standards and they're requiring them, but they really aren't. Or they're a minor downgrade and they're not as significant as they're making it out to be. You know, if this was the case, in my situation, I didn't have that in any planting notes. I didn't really require it anywhere. I would put it on the punch list and say, hey, please, while you're at it, can you remove those two crossing rubbing limbs on that end ligustrum or something like that. You can ask for whatever you want, but you have to, if you're going to negotiate and play hardball, you really got to be on firm ground. So whatever grade you gave it in step 5, if you reduce it in step 6, it's because you had true or more true statements. And then you're ready to move on to step 7, assuming the tree is still passable. Well, this is the last step and we're done. And this one's not so hard. Step 7, the tree is a cull if one or of the following conditions is true. Only one. Can take it from a Florida fancy down to a cull. From a Florida number 1 to a cull. From a Florida number 2 to a cull. This is a very powerful step. And quite honestly, some inspectors have said to me, I start with step 7 because that's really the biggie. Okay, what are these? First of all, this has to do with planting depth. This was something they added, and I was happy to see this in 2015 because this was not in the earlier version. The topmost structural root, I showed you a picture of that. Remember, Joe's finger was pointing to it. Roots among the largest on the tree. I call those the first order root, the main trunk flare, you know, think about your foot coming off of your leg. There's an ankle there. I mean, it's going to be similar on a tree. That topmost structural anchor root, first order root, whatever you want to call it, should be no more than 2 inches below the top of the root ball surface. I like to see the top of it, but if you see some trunk flare, you can pretty much know that you're in the ballpark. If the tree looks like a telephone pole in the ground, it's probably deep. Or even in the container. A lot of these nurseries, as I said before, they take these trees and they shift them up into a larger container. They don't pay attention to the roots. They don't trim the roots. A good grower is going to shave that root ball before they put it into the next size container. And when they put it in the next size container, they should be planting at the correct depth. So if it was deep, they're going to have to excavate soil off to bring it back to that flare and then plant it accordingly. And with regard to the shaving of the root ball, if you have certain pots that have the perforations in the wall of the container or on the bottom, the Pioneer pot was one that Dr. Gilman experimented with and had great results. All the roots grow out, they don't circle, they don't dive. The analogy I make of a really great root system is it should look like a toilet bowl brush. You know, all the roots, all the little fibers are going out straight. Anyway, soil or roots can be removed from the top 1/3 of the root ball to conform to this depth requirement. So there's your mitigation. That's what you would put on the punch list. If the trees are deep, either remove the soil or I would prefer the tree be lifted. I'll tell you why, because if you just dig the soil back, push it back up on the sides of the root ball, what's going to happen over time? It's going to wash back down, or the mulching truck is going to come and fill it in. So I would like to see that tree planted at the correct depth from the get-go. Okay, but this would be a good thing to do, especially if you're inspecting trees at the container stage before they go in the ground. Then the last step is about these roots. One or more roots greater than 1/10 the trunk caliper. And again, where do we measure that? 6 inches above grade.
6 inches above.
One or more roots greater than 1/10 the trunk caliper circle more than 1/3 of the way around in the top half of the root ball. All three conditions must exist to grade as a cull. So if you look at most root balls, you're going to find a lot of little tiny roots that do circle around the trunk or circle somewhere in the top of the root ball. We're not talking about those. We're talking about the roots that are a little bigger than that. And they have to go around more than 1/3 of the way around that root ball. They could be around the trunk. They could be around the edge of the root ball. It doesn't matter, anywhere in the top half. And I once asked Dr. Gilman, I said, well, why are we only concerned about the top half? And he said, because Mike, most of your permanent root system is going to originate from those upper roots, the ones that get the most oxygen. He says, the ones down at the bottom, a lot of times are either going to rot off. And a lot of times they're quite interwoven at the base of the container, aren't they? So they only really concern themselves with the top half of the root ball. Now, this is where some inspectors get into the weeds, going a little crazy with this. I don't think it's necessary that you dig the root ball when you're doing an inspection unless you have good cause, good reason to suspect there's a problem. You can spend a lot of time digging and getting your digger or your fingernails dirty. There have been cases of inspectors that sort of unearthed half of a root ball and left it that way. And then that gives the installer a great opportunity to come back and cry foul and say, hey, you dried out my plants, you destroyed my plants. It's not on me, it's on you, you know, and get into a real pissing match over that. So, you know, if you do dig it, note it, take a picture of it, but cover it back up, at least a good part of it, and tag the tree. But all three conditions must exist to be graded as a cull. Now, the good news is, if you have circling roots less than 1/3 of the trunk diameter, it can be cut. And if that is done, that tree no longer is a cull. It can go float back up to whatever it was before you got to this step. Isn't that amazing? And where you cut it is at the point where it turns. So let's say the root comes out to the edge of the container and then it goes left. It's following the container wall. Where do you want to cut it? After the turn or before the turn? Guys?
Before
Say
the
after
turn?
the turn.
For the turn.
Before the turn, that's correct. Yeah, if you cut it after the turn, it doesn't matter. It's going to grow back and still be in the wrong position. Remember, these roots are supposed to grow out away from the trunk and anchor the tree, bite into the soil beyond the hole eventually, right? So what about plunging roots? Roots that come out from the trunk and hit the edge of the container, and they don't circle, but they dive. The grades and standards says nothing about that. And myself and Kim Pearson and some other folks that, you know some people or are in the know about this and been doing it a while, know that plunging roots don't anchor a tree either. That's the problem with circling roots. It's the same problem with plunging roots. And the committee did not go for that. They didn't go for it back when they revised the grades and standards in 2015. And they didn't go for it this past winter, 2019, 2020. They claimed there was not enough research that showed a definitive reason why those plunging roots, they get the circling roots, that's already in here. But the plunging root was another issue. And so you can't require it, but you could ask for it. I know when Dr. Ed used to do his seminars, and he did one out here in 2008. I remember it was, I think, July. It was a hot day. We planted a pink tababuia behind the hurricane house, and we had a tree that had 3 plunging roots. And they were pretty good size, at least an inch in diameter. And they went out and they dove straight down. You know, they have nowhere to go, but they hit the container wall. They're going to go down. They didn't circle. He had me cut those. We cut them right before they plunged. Planted the tree. Actually, we elevated the tree twice. The hole was too deep. He made us keep lifting it up. And then we brought soil in and we covered those cut faces of those roots, those plunging roots. They were now facing out, not down. Covered them up, put some mulch around the tree, watered it in good. And then he had me go back and take pictures every so many months. And it was amazing to see the cut surface of that plunging root that was now developing many lateral roots growing straight out as they should. And the little cut face of the wound got callus wood, like when you do a branch removal, you know, the wound gets the wound wood, the callus as the wound closes, and that's what was happening on those cut faces of those roots. And that tree is rock solid. So again, committee didn't go for it, and so we can't require it, but you could ask for it. I mean, I guess you could require it outside of the grades and standards, but if you go back and say, well, I can't pass your tree because it doesn't meet grades and standards, it's got plunging roots, that doesn't work, that won't fly. Okay, so in closing, and then we'll get into we'll actually do a grading example next. By planting Florida grade number 1 or better trees in the right place in a landscape and providing proper maintenance, they will benefit the world for a lifetime. That's William Burns's parting statement on all of this. And I mean, we're doing it because the goal here is what? It's to develop sustainable urban tree canopy. So we don't plant these trees and 5-10 years later, they're gone, they're dead, they died out, they're weakened or whatever, a storm takes them out. So that's sort of why we have this in the first place, for health, safety, and longevity. Okay, so are there any questions before we get into grading a tree?
I just put one in the chat about whether you would be sharing the PowerPoint presentation with us by email afterwards.
You want a PDF? Sure, Diana can get those emailed out tomorrow. So if there are no questions, I want to now move into grading a tree. And this is where it'd be really nice if you have the ability to print out your tree grading form, which I apologize if you don't have the ability to do that. But we're basically going to do what we just did. And this is very much what your test is going to be like this, okay? So if everyone's ready, this will take about 10-15 minutes, and you can ask questions. Let's keep the mic open and keep the questions coming. This is where the rubber hits the road. And this is, you know, I maintain you really need to practice this in order to really learn it, but we're going to do a sample here. And if you guys feel you need a follow-up sometime, we can do that as well. So I went out to Rob Schulzen's Getting Green Plant Service in Davie here down the road. By the way, he took a lot of water recently, and he was telling me about that today. So I'm not sure. Well, I guess it's dried out by now, but you know, a lot of nurseries were pretty flooded out. So it's a beautiful place. He has really great trees. You know, not 100% perfect, but then we wouldn't want to do a class there if everything was perfect. They'd all be fancies, wouldn't they? But he's a good grower. He has, you know, he's kind of as a middleman. He buys a lot of stuff in, but he grows some stuff too. Anyway, we're out there, and I took pictures of these trees, and this is very much like what your exam is going to be. Okay, and again, if it was an ideal world and we were doing this in person with real live trees, that would probably be better, but right now this is the best we're going to be able to do. So we have a pink tab. I already told you the pink tabs fall into matrix 3, right? So we are already on our way. So choose the appropriate matrix type. That's type 3. And so if you're following along on your tree grading sheet, you're going to fill that in right here. We're going to circle 3, matrix 3, and we're going to measure the trunk caliper. Okay, so here's measuring the caliper. This is my little plastic tree grading tool, and we're going to open it up, and we're going to guesstimate about 6 inches above grade. It's about a 2-inch caliper. I would tell you that you round down if it's anything less than the nearest half number. So remember the grades and standards matrix is in half-inch increments. So if this was a little farther over, we might take it down to a 1.5. But it's pretty much on the 2 at this point. So we have a 2-inch caliper. So we'll record that on our tree grading form. And then we'll do step 2, which is grade the trunk structure. So what do you think, guys? Look at the bottom of the tree all the way to the top. And you have pretty decent trunk structure, don't you think?
Yeah.
Good.
It's either a Florida Fancy or a 1, but I think Florida Fancy.
Okay, well, I could probably go along with that. It's a little hard again to tell from the picture whether this limb is taller than that. I'm assuming that this is the real leader and that this is more of a branch. So I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt. You know, if we could be there in person and look at this tree from several perspectives, we could probably make a better judgment. But I don't see any major codoms. All these are branches. They're not that big. Remember, a codom has to be more than 2/3 the diameter of the trunk, and these are not.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go with a number 1 on that. And then we're going to grade the crown uniformity. Now, I'm going to give you, in the test, I'll have a graduated pole up there showing you how many feet it is and so forth. But we'll grade the crown uniformity. And so what am I looking at here? It's a pink tab. You know, they're not usually as dense as live oaks. They're not as open as gumbos, but looking at this tree, how many of you think this would pass?
I do.
Anybody else?
Me too.
Okay, yeah, I don't see really huge voids in it. It's got a little discoloration. I don't know what that's from, quite frankly. It might have some jalapa thrips, but you know, canopy wise, we're grading for uniformity. It looks pretty good. So if we called it a number 1 in this first step on trunk structure, we could probably call it a number 1 as well. Or I'm sorry, not a number 1, but it would actually be a fancy. It would pass. Okay. So that means step 4, the lowest grade determined, would be a number 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is everybody with me?
Yes.
You're going to circle crown uniformity, Florida Fancy, and then number 4 on your grade tree grading form, it would be a number 1 because we graded the trunk structure out as a number 1. And it could be a fancy. I'm really not sure again because we can't really tell that close from this picture. So next step is to grade. We'll go into the major downgrades. So I'm telling you that this tree measures 12 feet in height. So can somebody tell me what the minimum tree height would be for
6 foot.
a 2-inch caliper?
6 foot.
2-inch caliper, if you can see my cursor, 6 foot. And we know that the crown diameter that's coming up to is 30 inches, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it passes on the minimum height. It's 12 feet. It's twice the minimum of what it needs to be. Does a crown have a crown diameter? It measures 4 by 4 across, 4 feet from here to here. And the depth would be also 4 feet. And I take an average of that. Again, you're just going to eyeball this. But it comes out to be 48 inches by 48 inches. The minimum was 30, so no downgrade there either. Okay. So we got 2 inches, 30 inches, we're good. How about the container? Now I'm going to give you that this is a 25, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll have that information when you do the test. You check to see if the root ball is secure. How do we do that?
Shake it.
You shake it. Back and forth, side to side, tree and the container move as one. That's a good thing. When we did this in person, we had one of the three, you're gonna get 3 trees, by the way, that you have to grade for the exam. And I'll actually have more detailed pictures for those than what you see here tonight.
Dr. Orfanedes, I have
Yes.
a quick question.
Yes.
Sorry to bother. Quick question. If you're ever doing an inspection while, pre-planting, while they're still in the pots.
Yep.
You ever lift it out of the pot to observe, like?
In practice, no. In theory, it would be nice if I have reason to think that there's a problem, but otherwise I would not.
Okay.
If I was buying the tree for my backyard, yeah, you better believe I would. I got a Geiger tree at a giveaway, a Town of Davie giveaway, I believe, or maybe it was Water Matters Day. I think it was Town of Davie tree giveaway. Back in the citrus canker day, remember when the state was coming through and taking everybody's trees out, and then they kind of they'd make these trees available anyway. That little Geiger tree I took home, and you better believe I took it out of the container, and I'm telling you, it had a lot of root issues. I was pretty merciless. Planted that Geiger tree, kept it nice and moist. It never missed a beat, and I'm telling you, it is a gorgeous, gorgeous specimen today. I bet it's 18 to 20 feet tall. It has a trunk caliper of probably 5 to 6 inches on it. And I'm going for champion someday. The other trick is I drench it with imidacloprid every February because of the DM beetle. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So the root ball is secure and the container size is 25. Is that adequate for a 2-inch?
Yes.
2 inch? 25. Okay. All right. So now we move on to, I think this is the final step of step 5, is a training stake attached to the tree. Okay, this is 5E. Remember we talked about this?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is. Now, it's not a metal pole, it's a bamboo pole, but still it's a training stake. And the tree is 2 inches. Now, what does the grades and standards say about that?
A tree with a trunk caliber larger than 2 inches requires a stake to hold the trunk erect.
So theoretically, you could get away with it, leaving it on and pass it, because the diameter is 2 inches.
Dr. Orfanedes, I had a question.
Yes, please.
I mean, if it arrives at the job site like that, I mean, even though the standards requires that, I mean, wouldn't a good installer remove it and use their own proper staking according to the design specs?
Okay, first of all, the grades and standards does not require this stake at all. It only requires that it be removed if the tree is greater than 2 inches.
Gotcha.
You could require it again to be removed, in your planning notes or your other requirements section. But let's say he left it on, the installer left it on, and you wrote him up and you said you've got to remove the training stake per the grades and standards. Well, he could come back and say, actually, it's a 2-inch caliper and therefore I can leave it on, and he'd be on solid ground. Now, you and I know that there's no benefit to this stake at this point on this tree. I mean, it'd be highly unlikely if you take this off that tree would flop over. I can just tell by the girth of it, but you never know. I once bought a golden tap, Crisis Strike, a Tabuya Crisis Strike, down in Homestead from a grower. I love that tree. At the time, I thought they were wonderful. I'm not so crazy about them now, but anyway, I still have it. And I took the training stake off of it when I went to plant it, and the damn thing fell over the fence, literally hit my neighbor's house. We have very narrow shallow backyards. And I'm like, wow, man, I guess I got to put a training stake back on that tree. It was about 2-inch caliper, maybe not quite. And that tree, it ended up, I had to leave that stake on for a couple of years. Eventually I got it off, but so up to 2 inches, you can leave it on. I don't recommend it. I mean, I think it's much more preferable to get it off, but the grades and standards would allow you to keep it on up to 2 inches. So, assuming the tree is still in a gradable state and we haven't tagged it for remediation or removal, we're going to move on to step 6. The minor downgrades. Are there flush cuts evident? And how about branch stubs? Okay, this is a close-up. This is not a stub. This is a pruning wound that is primarily closed. I think it's fine. I wouldn't worry too much about it. And even if it was open, would that necessarily disqualify the tree? No, not unless there were other downgradable defects that we haven't gotten to yet. Okay, so not a problem there. So I have a couple pictures. This is a scuff. Okay, that is not a downgradable defect. It's a bruise. It's a bruise or a scuff. Okay, it may have been abrasion. Up here you've got a small diameter open wound, but again, not ideal, but not probably enough to downgrade the tree. This one is another open wound. This could have been a flush cut at one point. Like I said, I think we showed this earlier. There is some wound wood here, not so much over here. But again, it's not very big. It's probably under 10% the circumference. It may be close to 10%. That's a bit of a, little subjective thing there. It's not a major wound. So you have to kind of use your professional judgment on this stuff. So we would say no. And then you come to this step. Is 10% of the crown chlorotic, necrotic, or damage from pest diseases and tip dieback? Yeah.
Thrips.
Got a bad thrip problem, which I think is part of the chlorosis going on. And of course, the deformed curly leaves. So it is absolutely going to be a factor there. So I suppose if you had this plus another minor downgrade, yeah, you could tag the tree as to be replaced, or you really can't remediate that. Well, I guess you could drench it with imidacloprid, but it's going to look pretty ugly for quite a while. So again, it's a minor downgrade. It's not the prettiest tree. This is where it gets a little hairy. Some inspectors would fail that tree just on the basis of its appearance, but from a grades and standards standpoint, I'm not so sure about that. Okay. And then is the crown thin and sparsely foliated? For a yellow tab, the main problem here is the whole apothrips. So I don't really think it's, minus the insect infestation, I don't think it's a sickly tree. And then about the included bark. Here's an example of included bark. And I don't recall, quite honestly, but I think that's what this is. I think this is maybe taken from the backside. That kind of concerns me because that's rolled inward, right? And in this case, so the way the photo looks, this looks to be a very large codom. I don't know, quite honestly, guys, whether these are the same. I'm assuming they are. I wouldn't have put it in here, but that could be a concern. So if you had that plus the thrip problem, that's a downgrade. That's 2 issues. Okay? Is everybody with me?
Yes. Yes.
Last but not least,
Yes.
grade the trunk of the tree, not the trunk, the root ball. And it's a little hard to tell here. Yeah, it looks a bit like a telephone pole, doesn't it? Might be deep. So this is why you carry a little tool with you, and you could just say to the contractor, look, the trees look deep. I need you to excavate them and have me come back and inspect them and tell them what, that first order needs to be visible and within the top 2 inches. So we did dig it a little bit. I'm going to show you what it looked like. I think that was what it was here. So you see this root back here and circled around the trunk. That would probably be about 10% the diameter, and it is circling at least a third of the way around. So That would be a root you would require to be cut back here at the point where it originates. It's a trunk stem girdling root. If it was much smaller though, I think you probably would let it go. If I was planting in my backyard, you better believe I'd cut it. But you know, again, this is so subjective, this stuff, I'm telling you. So anyway, what did we end up grading this tree as then? It was a number 1, and then we found it had 2 downgradable defects in step 6. It had the
The,
strips and it had the bark inclusion.
oh, the inclusion, yeah.
That takes it from a number 1 to a number 2.
Yes.
And when you think about those issues, the holophothrips is not going to go away anytime soon. So it's not really remediable. I mean, you could argue the tree could be drenched and maybe next year or later this year, it might leaf out, you know, normally. The inclusion, again, is going to be something that's difficult to remediate. So I would suggest it be replaced. So you can see there's a lot of room for interpretation here and so forth. It's not a perfect hard, fast science. When I give you guys the exam, I'm going to try to make the trees hopefully fairly clear cut. I don't want to give you really tough type situations. Those of you that are sitting in on the class that were in the previous exam may beg to differ with me. I don't know. But I want to talk now, just go through the last few slides here, and that'll be our program for tonight. I got 10 minutes left, so we'll probably finish pretty close to 9. What is that, and is that a defect? Downgradable.
I don't think it's
No.
Why not?
minor flesh wound.
Okay. It's a maple tree, I can tell you that.
Looks like it's up against something. It doesn't look like it really got into the tree itself, any open wounds or anything like that.
Yeah, and maples are pretty thin, thin bark trees. So I'm thinking that that's a surface abrasion, either from transportation to the job site, or it might be from on the tether line, as I call it in the nursery. And I think the wound above it is maybe a little flush, but it's pretty small. So I wouldn't, again, they're not ideal, they're not pretty, but I don't think they're grounds for rejecting the tree, certainly. And it's kind of the same with this one. It's a very small diameter wound. And you kind of got to think big picture here. And, when I gave you guys the example of the Publix on Sterling Road with the, the approved plan installed per the plan and yet screwed up by the people that reviewed the plan and the designer, much more important to put the gumbo limbos up on the dry ground and put the cypress in the wet hole and fight for that, And you can use this as currency. You can say, well, you got some flush cuts on some of those trunks and on those maple trees that aren't too pretty and could be considered a downgrade because they've also got some other issues. But I'm willing to accept that if you'll move this tree for that tree kind of thing. So a lot of give and take, a lot of negotiation here. Communication is the biggest issue, I think, in this whole deal. Communicating your expectations, making it very clear early on when you have the pre-conferences prior to any work being done on the job site. Here we have a red maple. This again is Rob Scholzen's. This is a little more similar to what I'm going to be giving you on the test, except I'll probably tell you where this training graduated measuring stick tops out at. I would give you that certainly. But looking at the tree, what do you think? How would you grade that on, let's say, canopy uniformity, step 3? Is that acceptable or not?
I would say it's a number 2 for uniformity.
Yeah, agreed.
I think so too. It's pretty one-sided tree.
Yeah.
So, that's not something that's going to be highly remediable either. Sometimes with trees like that, I have accepted them, but I've had them rotate the tree so that I actually did this at St. Bonaventure Church. It was a tababuia that kind of looked like this. And I wanted it so that the flat side was facing the sunlight and not up against the church side. And so I knew that the canopy would grow out, you know, if it faced the light. So that was an orientation issue. Okay. Looking at the top of this maple tree, what do you see?
Lots of leaders.
Lots of leaders. Yes, we do. So it's not a
Pick
fancy,
one.
probably not a fancy. And is it a number one?
Probably not.
Let's say for just discussion.
You might be able to make it a number one if I could really look at the tree.
There you go. There you go. So, you know, even with a number one, the main leader, which I'm assuming is this, I don't really know, but let's say for discussion's sake, I say it's this one, has to be the tallest. That would mean you couldn't really make it a number one unless you subordinated this limb and this limb over here at least.
Mhm.
So you would come down somewhere and find another limb and you'd cut this out. And you do the same over here. Here's a place I might make a reduction cut. It needs a little bit of, I don't want to use the word tipping, but that's what I'm talking about. You always want to kind of bring a leader or a crazy limb back to another smaller diameter, and that's called a reduction cut. So if I could kind of isolate the upper 10% of this, I think that would be fine. So that'd be a punch list.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Let's say we have this situation in the exam. We're gonna have like the possibility to say, like, let's say we can make this number one if we trim it, or if we try to fix the shape and everything, or that's not gonna be part of the answer.
Great question. You're thinking like an inspector. I love it. It is what it is in
Oh, thank
front of you without any. I love to get off on remediating trees. I love working with culls. I like to make a cull into a fancy. It's a challenge, you know, it takes some time too, but that's not practical, you know, in a commercial type situation. I can do that out here in the back in the nursery. We have a research and demonstration area, but you know, yeah, I mean, you can do it. You could require it, certainly. And I think, but yeah, and that's what remediation is all about, you know, accepting a tree that has defects because you know that you're requiring the installer to make those, and typically they're pruning cuts. Pruning cuts are easy to do if you've got somebody who knows what they're doing. And so to that point, we worked a lot with a company called Sunflower. I don't know if they're even still in business. They did a lot of the GL homes that we were inspecting out in West Davie. And I kept finding myself wanting to pass number twos with remedial pruning. And so I put that on the punch list and I'd come back for the reinspection. There was a fee for that. And it wasn't done. And so finally I got with their guy and I said, here, we're going to have a class today. I'm going to teach you how to do this. And so I got with the guy and we went through it, and it took a couple more inspections before they got to the point where I was ready to accept them. But there was a learning curve going on there. But, you know, to the extent that you as an inspector can also be an educator, that's a real service to the industry, I think. But don't get caught into doing their job. And I had one guy that used to kind of think, you know, I'm going to let Mike do it. You know, he knows what he's, no, that I'm the inspector. I'm not the installer. And it got to the point where I had to say to him, you know, I don't even remember his name. Unless you want to ride back with me to town hall and help me enter all this stuff in the computer at the building services department, I can't spend my afternoon here doing your job. You got to do it. You know, I've showed you how to do it. Now you're going to do it, or I'm not passing it. And so, you know, he learned to do it. All right. How about this one? Is that a concern?
I don't think it's a big concern. I think it's definitely a flush cut at the beginning, but it looks like it's healing over. So
I think it's actually, it's a really good wound closure. Some people say they should look like a belly button if they're really well formed. Yeah, there's no open trunk wood or anything. It's closed over, you know, can see some of the rings. The other thing is, and some of the tree guys have picked up on this, a properly executed cut, of course, leaves the branch collar, the swelling, if you will, visible and intact. Over time, though, as the tree grows radially in diameter, it absorbs that old cut to the point where an untrained eye might say, yeah, that looks like it's flush. No, the tree is absorbing it. Eventually, that's going to completely disappear. How about this? Circling root, stem girdling in this case, but that root could be out at the edge of the container. It doesn't matter where it is, anywhere in the top, what? Third, half, or 3/4 of the root ball.
I think it's half.
Half.
Top half, yeah. So honestly, guys, you're never going to really get down into be probably below the first few inches. You can go ahead and dig to your root ball to your heart's content, I suppose, but time is money, and you're going to have a lot of inspections, and you know, you don't need to be OCD about it. How about this one?
That's okay. It doesn't have to be downgraded.
Are they greater than 10% of the circumference? And are they even open? Let's start with that.
It's hard to see from the picture how deep it is or how.
I think they're superficial. I don't know whether they may be just related to, I think that might be a purple tab, and they have a fairly smooth bark. And as the trunk expands radially, you'll get some little, what appear to be growth cracks. I see that in the fall on mahogany trees even. I think it's normal.
Mhm.
I think they're pretty superficial. This I know, I'm almost 100% positive was a purple tab. I love that tree, but there are very few of them that are grown with any decency. They're very hard to find good quality ones. What do you think this is going to grade out at on trunk?
Call.
So is that in the lower half or the upper half?
I will show you for the exam, but for all practical,
I'm gonna say not good. I'm gonna say number 2. You got a lot of
there's a lot going on there.
codominant, and I see some bark inclusion probably in there too.
This could be the
Not
beginning
good.
of inclusion. Yeah, this tree, and if this is in the lower half, even if it was in the upper half, it's a number 2. If it's in the lower half, it's a call. It's got too many trunks. I don't know where halfway point is, guys. I really don't.
Beautiful.
You know, the more I'm looking at this, I think this is, where was that? Now, maybe not, maybe not. Anyway, yeah, they're this is definitely not the leader, and this is the biggest trunk of all of them, huh? This is you're back here. So yeah, this tree is this is one I take to IFAS and work on for a while. So that would be definitely an orange tag, remove and replace. And then sometimes you'll find these. Look at this root.
Wow.
There are inclusions that can form between trunk and stem girdling root. And that's what you see right here. See how it's rolled in the valley? And in fact, this root is putting so much pressure on the trunk, it's actually beginning to split.
Wow.
So Mike, I see that root. So I know if it's 1/3 wrapping around it, then you'd have to, you know.
Well, not only is it well, I'm assuming it starts back here. Look, this looks like it's decaying.
If it wasn't 1/3, you really couldn't reject it, even though it looks like it's plunging also when it gets to that, like right past your finger, like right there. It looks like a plunging.
I swear, this is a defect that originated probably back at the 3-gallon stage, or maybe even earlier. This is a defect from way back when that was never corrected. It could have been corrected when it was quite small, and it probably could have developed some nice roots going straight out, but this has been let go way too long. The other thing is it's at least, I think, 1/3 the trunk diameter. You've already got visible decay and damage going on. So this thing needs to go on the burn pile. Y'all understand that?
Yes.
This is the old container wall.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen trees that go back to the liner stage, you know, like the cell tray.
Yeah.
Nothing but it looked like a pig's tail.
And there's nothing you can do about it at that stage to correct that.
You know,
Yeah, you're
I
gonna,
had brought it here to IFAS and I made a cut back here and I planted it high and let this dry out. It might resolve, but no, not on a commercial site. No way. No way. We had a situation at the Nova Southeastern Family Center, something like that. They had paradise trees spec'd for the playground, and there were a bunch of them. And paradise trees, or at least back in 2003, 2004, were very hard to come by. I remember they were all had horrible root systems, and you know, it pained me to reject them, but good God, it was a tot lot. And I'm like, absolutely not. And I went back and I said, remove and replace all of them, every one of them. There were like 10 of them. And the installer complained to me and he said, this was the only grower in South Florida, which I don't know whether that was true or not. I probably could look in the plant finder and see, but I said, no, absolutely not. I'm not signing off on this. This is a tot lot. I mean, I've got tons of liability here. These trees go down in an afternoon gusty storm or something and they're falling on the kids or no way. He couldn't find any. So we ended up, he replaced them with, I think we ended up with crepe myrtles or something else, which would have the ones that can, he learned his lesson. I said, I'm just not going to accept them. There's no way I'm going to take that liability on, professionally or personally. So, sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and be a puppy. We're not in this business to please people. We're in this business to serve the public and follow the law or the code. I think this is the last one I've got. Nope, one more. So this is classic bark inclusion. Okay, codominancy. This might have been the one I was referring to before. So that would be a minor or major downgrade inclusion.
Major.
Major inclusion. Forget the fact that this is obviously a codom and this tree would not have passed on trunk grading. If you were grading the trunk, you would have failed this.
Okay, right? Just for the inclusion, yeah, I guess a minor, but if you look past the inclusion, a major.
Yeah. Well, so
okay, just the inclusion, yes, minor.
Okay. And how about the roots on this maple tree?
I think they could fix that with, there could be remediation with that.
Okay, looks like you have enough.
I agree.
Cut it here at the point where it originates. Cut it here and get rid of this piece. Same over here. And then this one is smaller than 1/10 the diameter, so I guess you could let it go. Again, I know it's not going to ever go away and disappear someday. It's just going to get bigger. So, as long as you're doing it, you might as well take care of this one too. But in terms of what you're repairing, this would be the one I would worry about, and maybe this one.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets crazy. At some point you got to say, well, enough is enough. So this is a maple, I'm pretty sure. Well, I want to thank you guys. That's all I've got for tonight. Thanks for participating. Practice, practice, practice. And you'll be well on your way to becoming an accomplished grader. How about that? If you have any questions, contact me. There's my email. I would suggest in preparation, you download the grades and standards. It's free. Just Google Florida Grades and Standards 2015. You get the whole shebang. And, you've also got your tree grading form that Diana emailed you tonight, plus the matrices, and practice it. Go to a nursery, practice on a couple trees. If you have questions, you can email me. I will be out of town. I'm going to Arizona December 2nd through, oh God, we're going to see my son out in Sedona.
Mike, I also add the files in the chat so they can save it. I add the grades and standards and the forms and the matrices so they can just click it and save it.
Thank you, Diana. I'm going the 2nd through the 8th. Okay, so your exam is on the 12th. So I'm back on the 9th, 10th, 11th. You can get a hold of me. And the exam will be at 9 a.m. on Zoom on Saturday, the 12th, 1 week after your the rest of your exam. We call it the written part. It's the questions, the multiple. That's on the 5th. Both of those exams on Zoom at 9 a.m., 1 week apart. December 5th and Saturday, December 12th will be the grades and standards. And I'll have 3 trees for you to grade. They'll be probably from Rob Schulzen's nursery. And I'll be very similar to what we just did. I will try to give you even more pictures than what you had tonight. There'll probably be one that's pretty easy, one that's a little more difficult, and there may be one that's, you know, a little bit even more difficult than that. But, you know, I'm going to try to, and for the purposes of my grading your work, I want to get into
The
little
mushrooms and onions back,
people on
heavy
the
cream,
kind of-
and
All the heavy cream?
okay?
Quick question, the form, it's going to be emailed to us? Because I haven't received anything yet.
You all
Yeah,
see-
that form.
Your exam, you're going to have to fill out 3 of these for each of 3 different trees. So, you know, one might be.
Yeah, but we're going to get it just to practice?
I just sent an email prior to the class, and I also look at your chat. There is the forms, and there is the grades and standards, and there is the matrices. And you can
Yeah,
download.
for some reason in my chat, there's nothing there.
Okay,
Right.
but what's your email? Can you type your email in the chat, because I just sent that before the class.
Sure.
So again, you know, download the grades and standards. Just Google it in 2015, and you can do it on your phone and play around with it. You know, practice. That's the best thing I can say. If you've got questions, you can contact me anytime, except between December 2nd and 8th. I'm in Arizona. I'll be back on the 9th. We've got the 10th and 11th, so I can take questions any of those 3 days. Call me. I can give you my number. It's 954-993-0175. That's my cell. When I'm out in Arizona, though, I will not be responding to questions. I'm going to be visiting with my kids and hopefully climbing the Red Rock, at least as far as we can get. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. I know it was kind of a long evening. It's 9:10, but any feedback? Do you feel like you're a little more knowledgeable about tree grading now?
yes,
Thank
definitely.
you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sending an email as well. So, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure. Henry, are you still there? Do you need to say anything more to the guys tonight, and the ladies? Okay, he may have signed off. Diana, do you have
I
any
think so.
housekeeping?
Yeah, I don't know. Carolina is saying that she didn't get the email, but I just was looking everything, and I have your Carol iscm@hotmail.com. Please check your email, please. We just sent it like half an hour before the class.
Yes, I'm checking it. I haven't received anything from you.
Me
So I
too.
don't know what to do.
Not even in the junk folder.
Do you guys want to email Diana and I again? You're just say, you know, thanks for the class, and then we'll have your email and we can double check it maybe in the morning.
Sure.
Yes, I'm sending one now. So
Okay, sounds good, guys. All right, well, listen,
thank you so much.
participating, good luck, practice, and you know, we're here to help you out.
Okay. See you
All
soon.
Good night.
Enjoy your vacation.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
thanks again.
Have a good evening.